This is Old Nick. Real name, Nicholas Crowder. Job, being the spirit of Australian Christmas, I guess. I'm not sure if that counts as a job, but if not, then I guess kidnapping kids is his job. Don't worry, I heard you guys loud and clear. I know you've been asking for Old Nick for a long time now. Here I was thinking he was a dead character that hasn't been relevant since 2011. And I was right in thinking that. But that's not gonna stop me from making a Christmas-themed history video. Or should I say, Australian Christmas-themed? Or Smissmas? In the TF2 universe, those are kinda like two separate holidays. But we'll get to that later. Old Nick is an old man who has a cape made out of koalas and wears a reindeer skull on his head. And he's essentially the TF2 universe's version of Santa. But if you're newer to TF2 and haven't tried to actively catch up on years worth of stuff that you missed, there's a good chance you might not have heard of him. 2010 was the first year that Team Fortress 2 received a major update in December that was actually holiday themed. Prior to that, we only had the war update, which was, more war themed. But 2010 had the Australian Christmas update, which introduced the usual update stuff, but also brought a new character called Old Nick and told the story of Australian Christmas. And legend has it that on December 18th, 1788, not long after Australia was first colonized, an old cutthroat named Nicholas Crowder arrived there on a boat with some other settlers. He took one look at the heat and privations, said, "Screw this," stole the boat, and headed down to conquer the South Pole. From then on, Old Nick would spy on the children of Australia and return every December 18th to determine if the Australian children have been naughty or nice. The nice kids get the gift of not being abducted, while the naughty kids get the gift of being abducted and brought back to the South Pole where they're used as slave labor at Old Nick's sweatshop. For the next 12 months, these kids make hats and weapons to Old Nick's exact specifications. Then every year on December 17th, they're all gift wrapped and brought back to Nick's mansion where he opens them. And since Old Nick just has so many slaves, he's bound to get some duplicate items, which he promptly sells the next day at prices so low, he's practically giving them away. Given what we see here, we could probably make the assumption that Manco buys up a bunch of these hats and weapons for dirt cheap, and then passes them off as their own. I like to think that the Ullapool caper was made by child slaves and that Manco just slapped their label on it. It seems like something they would do. It's in the spirit of Australian Christmas. But I thought TF2's December update was called Smissmas, not Australian Christmas, you say as drool drips down your ignorant, uncultured face. Well, both of these holidays exist in TF2 land. Imagine it, more than one holiday in December? It's outrageous. Though I guess I should say that both of these holidays existed in the TF2 universe. Australian Christmas died with Old Nick when both holidays collided in the comic A Smissmas Story. But where did Smissmas even come from, you ask, interrupting my video for a second time? Well, I'll tell you. In November 2011, the TF2 team made a blog post asking for community members to make new items to coincide with a certain upcoming holiday that their legal department wouldn't let them mention. But it rhymes with Smissmas, and thus Smissmas was born. And it kinda stuck. Later in the blog post for 2011's Australian Christmas update that led to the Smissmas Story comic, they said that in this clash of holidays, only one would leave. And they kept their word. Smissmas won and Australian Christmas faded away, only to be mentioned like once more in a sniper voice line. In that comic, Scout, Spy, and Soldier are sentenced to community service after blowing up a mall Santa training facility. Soldier becomes the Two Fort Mall Santa, Scout is an elf, and Spy he's just there watching, I guess. But then Old Nick comes in to kidnap the children, and Scout and Soldier fight him off, while Spy convinces Little Jack to stab Old Nick in the neck when he tries to abduct him. The first Australian Christmas kinda made it seem like Old Nick only kidnapped Australian kids, but now for some reason he's showing up in New Mexico. Maybe there aren't enough kids left in Australia, or maybe Australia has made the kids too strong to kidnap? But either way, he's broadening his kidnapping game. And yeah, after Old Nick died, he hasn't been seen. He's barely even been mentioned. Which is a little bit weird because TF2 comics and updates don't always take place in chronological order, so he could show up. But no, he's dead and he'll probably stay dead. And how did Old Nick live that long to begin with? I mean, he'd be over 200 years old by the time a Smissmas story takes place. So something supernatural is going on with Old Nick. He doesn't die of old age, he has flying reindeer and kangaroo, and something's up with his eyes. He's portrayed as having completely white eyes or very, very light pupils. And he also wears a skull hat. You know who else is really old and wears a skull hat? Marasmus. Is Old Nick actually a secret wizard? Get on it, game theory. I know nobody cares at this point, but I actually kind of like that idea. It's kind of weird that within 1 year, 2 old guys wearing skulls on their heads show up in TF2 and they're not related in any way. And according to the True Meaning comic, Old Nick is also in debt to the Mafia, like Marasmus. It's just kinda strange. Is it a coincidence? I think not. Why would Old Nick suddenly show up in Two Fort, New Mexico, if not to visit his old buddy Marasmus? See, it all makes too much sense, it practically writes itself. It's not even a game theory, I'm calling it a fact. TF2 writers, if I'm right, don't say anything in the comments. Yep, what did I tell you? And now it wouldn't be one of these videos if I didn't do a timeline bit. So, here we go. Nicholas Crowder is born sometime, probably in the 1700s, or possibly much earlier if he is indeed a wizard. His place of origin is unknown, but given his last name and where he ends up going, I think England would probably be a good bet. On December 18th, 1788, Nick, along with some other settlers, arrive in Australia, but Nick isn't having any of it. So he takes the boat and heads on a one-man voyage to conquer the South Pole, which he does. Nick spies on the kids of Australia and returns again on December 18th to kidnap any naughty children, probably putting the first Australian Christmas in 1789. The Australian government makes Australian Christmas an official holiday in a ham-fisted attempt to turn a notorious felon into a beloved folk hero. Legend says that Old Nick loves to bet on college basketball and ends up in debt to the Mafia. 3 wise guys hunt him down by following a star that leads him to Old Nick and his child slaves. And this begins the great Australian Christmas shootout between Nick and the Mafia. And they say on Australian Christmas Eve, if you look into the sky, you can still see a light on that sweatshop smokestack. And sometime between 1968 and 1970, Old Nick shows up at the Two Fort Mall where he gets stabbed in the neck and dies. And Australian Christmas is officially over, presumably with all of those kids still stuck in Antarctica. And that is actually where it ends this time, for Old Nick at least. Okay, so in a Smissmas story, when asked how it feels to be a hero, Scout responds that it just feels like a Saturday. So we could kind of assume that that comic takes place, like on a Saturday, December 18th. And with the main TF2 storyline taking place between 1968 and 1970, the only year where December 18th falls on a Saturday is 1971. But by that time, the Robot War has already begun, so it's really probably not 1971. But I'm sure I'm looking way too far into that, and at this point nobody cares. But anyway, a little while ago I said I was working on a 2-part video, and obviously this isn't it. But there is other stuff that I want to get done first before I make that, so it won't be out until 2020. And don't worry, I am going to make the Soldier one, it will be next in this series, so you got that to look forward to, I guess. And Merry Smissmas, and happy Smoosmere. Peace out, dogs.